So welcome to the last week in this book before we move on to some others. And this last chapter, number 10 here, is the planes of realization. And the primary focus of this chapter is on the 4 levels of the path in the Pali Canon, which are the stream enterer, the once returner, the non-returner, and the arhat. So that's the primary focus, but it does include a few other things as well as a part of that. So in the introduction, Bhikkhu Bodhi says the cultivation of wisdom aims at the realization of nirvana. So there are fixed series of stages on the way, and the liberated one, the arhat, has attained full comprehension of the Four Noble Truths and realized nirvana in this present life. So that's an important part of the view from the Theravada, let's say, tradition, or the Nikaya tradition, as some scholars are now calling it. Excuse me. And so that's what we're going to be exploring as a part of this. Excuse me. So we'll explore the first 3 stages in a more systematic manner, and the fourth one as well. On entering the path, one becomes a noble person. And then there are 4 major types in 2 phases each, the path and its fruition. In the path phase, we're said to be practicing for the attainment of the fruition. So there's the path, and then there's result, would be another way of putting that. And then within that same life, achieving that within the same life, in the resultant phase, we establish that fruition. So that gives us 4 pairs or 8 types. And so then in the first text, we talk about one practicing for the realization of the fruit of stream entry. So first we're practicing in order to get there, and then we achieve the fruition. So those are the 2 stages of each of these. Same with stream enterer, and also once returning, and then the arhat. So then in the second text, these are subsequent stage processes require stronger faculties than the preceding stage, and the first 7 are collectively considered to be trainees. So all the way up until the result of the arhat stage, you're considered to be in the path of a trainee. But the arhat is called beyond training. So you've superseded that. In the third text, there are standard definitions of the 4 types, and he provides a table for us on page 375 here, which is very helpful in trying to understand exactly what the key points are related to each of these. So on the left-hand column, we have the 4 planes of existence, if you will, the stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, arhat. And then actually the most important column is the middle one. And here he talks about 5 lower stages and 5 higher stages within that. And within each of those, the first part of it is talking about the fetters that are being eliminated. So as we move up, what we're doing is eliminating additional fetters that are a part of the process. So as a stream enterer, we have identity view, that's the view of self, doubt, dealing with the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, wrong grasp of rules and observances, having to do with rituals and asceticism, and then the once returner, there's no more fetters that are eliminated at that level, but it does weaken 3 other characteristics: lust, hatred, and delusion, the 3 poisons. Okay. Then we move to non-returner, and here the sensual lust and ill will are added to the fetters that have been eliminated. So now we're down to 1. And then we have 5 higher forms: desire for existence in the form realm, desire for existence in the formless realm, and conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. So ignorance would actually be the 5th of the 5 lower fetters that are to be eliminated. So the first parts of that we no longer desire the first 2 of the realms, the desire realm and the form realm. Okay, and then desire realm, form realm, and formless realm, excuse me. And then we add to that conceit and restlessness, and then ignorance. And once we've achieved that, we are completely liberated according to this particular model. So I think that can be helpful to us in understanding that. Now, the path of Tantra is a little bit different than this, but it certainly includes a great deal of what is in that particular model. In the 4th text, which starts at the very bottom of that page, 375, but really goes on to 376 here, as an abiding state, arhatship is reserved for monks and nuns. This does not mean that only monks and nuns can attain arhatship, however. The sutras and commentaries do record a few cases of lay disciples attaining the final goal. However, such disciples either attain arhatship on the brink of death, so right before you die, or enter the monastic order very soon after their attainment. So either they die or they become a monk or nun, basically. They do not continue as arhat householders, as described in here. For dwelling at home is incompatible with the state of one who has severed all craving. So that one is quite dramatically different than the approach of Tantra that we have, where the role of householder actually is sometimes considered to be better than that of a monk or a nun. So very different kinds of approaches in these two and their positions on those two. Now, we also have to remember that these things are being written by mostly monks. In a few cases we get some nuns included there. But they're already in monastic orders and they're trying to differentiate themselves. So they're making themselves look like they are superior to householders. In contrast, non-returners, so we're not at the full level of the arhat yet, but we will achieve that within one lifetime. Non-returners can continue to dwell as householders while they continue to live as lay disciples, and they have eradicated sensual desire and thus necessarily observe celibacy. So that's one of the things in this particular tradition that is included with having attained that level of understanding, that in order to get rid of all desire, you also get rid of sexual desire, hence celibacy as a part of that. Going on down a number of lines about the middle of the page here, lay stream enterers and once returners, however, are not necessarily celibate. So it's only at that third stage during which one becomes celibate according to this model. Buddha describes them as lay followers clothed in white. Does that sound familiar? The white tradition that we have, where we have householders that wear the nakpa robes and the white, and so that is also related to this. And enjoying sensual pleasures, who carry out my instruction respond to my advice, have gone beyond doubt, become free from perplexity, gained intrepidity, and become independent of others in the teacher's dispensation. Thus, while some stream enterers and once returners may observe celibacy, and we know that to be true in our tradition as well, this is by no means typical of these two classes. So those first two classes are more likely to be householders, but it's not a given. I mean, when you first enter, a lot of the tradition involved becoming a monk or a nun at very, very young ages. And so part of that involved going through those first two stages also within that context and following all of those rules, including celibacy. But a celibate 7-year-old is probably not a big issue. He continues on to talk about another scheme for classifying disciples. So there's more than one way to do this. And here he talks about it in terms of a dominant faculty rather than a level of attainment. And this is included here in the 5th text, which divides arhats into 2 categories: those liberated in both ways and those liberated by wisdom. So the former, the ones liberated in both ways, are liberated because they are liberated from form by their mastery over the formless meditations, and from all defilements by attainment of arhatship. Okay? So those are the 2 parts. So they've transcended the issues related to form by mastering the formless meditations. And the formless meditations in our tradition are much more like the shamatha without signs, the kind of thing that we would do in Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And then also have attained arhatship, so having eliminated all of these fetters or taints and so forth that we have seen in other texts. And then the second one is the liberated by wisdom aspect, which have not mastered the formless attainments, but have, by the power of their wisdom, combined with concentration, the lower than the formless states. So those would be the 4 jhanas, or jhanas. Then continuing on 377 in the next paragraph, those who have attained any of the lower stages from stream entry on up to and including arhatship, so any of the 4 stages, are divided into 3 categories. One is a body witness who've mastered the formless attainments. One attained to view, which lacks the formless attainments and gives prominence to wisdom. And the third one liberated by faith. And that could be at any of these stages who lacks the formless attainments and gives prominence to faith. So those are 3 different approaches that can be also applied here. So it's not just the one model, but there's several different approaches, and they tend to disagree with each other just a little bit in terms of what they have to have had or haven't attained yet as a part of that. So these then are the Dharma follower and the faith follower, are the 2 general categories that are described. Continuing on, 3 more paragraphs down at the bottom of the page on 377, to reach the attainment of stream entry, the disciple should cultivate the 4 factors leading to stream entry. So this is the number 2.1, which is providing some guidance now about stream entry itself and how we get into that. So it explains that these are, first, associating with wise and virtuous spiritual guides. So we need a good teacher to help us along the way. Listening to the true Dharma. So we have to listen, pay attention to the actual teachings. The third one is attending carefully to things. And it gives some examples such as gratification, danger, and escape. So we have to be a little bit careful about that and go back to the second one and follow the Dharma that was taught along the way. And then the fourth one is practicing in accordance with the Dharma. So we need to do the practices in that way. About 5 or 6 more lines down, it talks about the disciple's understanding will undergo a major transition which marks the entry upon the fixed course of rightness, the true noble eightfold path that leads to irreversibility of nirvana. The second text then in that category, 2.2, though not yet a stream enterer, a person at this stage cannot pass away without having realized the fruit of stream entry. So once we get into the level of practice, we're not going to pass away until we've at least attained the fruition of that particular one of the four. So then he goes on and does the same kind of thing for each of the other four, all of which end with the same comment that when you enter that particular level, that you can't pass away until you've actually realized the fruition of that. Then on page 379, according to text X31 or 1031, to abandon the 5 lower fetters, a monk first attains one of the 4 jhanas or one of the 3 lower formless attainments. The constituent factors of the 4th formless attainment are too subtle to serve as objects of insight. So these things become increasingly subtle as we go through these various stages. And so skipping a line, so he subsumes them under the 5 aggregates, and form in this case is omitted as an aggregate here because this is talking about the formless attainments, and so it doesn't make sense to have form as one of the things to address here. And so he contemplates each of the 4 parts of the 5 aggregates as impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So each of the aggregates looked at from those 3 positions: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. And we saw, those are all 3 very important principles in the Buddha's teaching. And last time we saw that impermanence was considered actually to be the most important of all of those. On the next line, as contemplation advances, his mind focuses upon nirvana. If he can relinquish all attachments, he attains arhatship. So once we get rid of all of our attachments, and actually there are lists of those that we've seen in last week and in some of them prior to that. And so there are fairly specific things that need to be included there, not just a general idea of attachment. In the next paragraph, the Buddha recognized differences in the approaches individuals take achieving the final goal, and then in text X32, he divides persons into 4 categories. And those are attained through 2 pairs. And so he first distinguishes those in terms of the strength of their spiritual faculties. Those with strong faculties reach final nirvana in this life. Those with weak faculties attain final nirvana in the next life. So only one more. The other pair of the 4, we have disciples based on motive development. And there's 2 of those approaches. The difficult approach, which uses meditation subjects that generate sharp wisdom, and on the next page, and lead directly to disenchantment and dispassion. And the other class takes the smoother route through the 4 jhanas. So these are the 2 types that correspond roughly to those who give emphasis to insight and those who give emphasis to serenity. So that again is another model of the approach that can be used, or understanding of the approach that can be used to accomplish nirvana. Skipping the next paragraph, going down to text X34, this one makes further distinctions among those who attain arhatship and the stage of non-returner. So that's the 3rd stage of the 4. And here, skip over to the next page, 381, and the paragraph beginning the subtle attachment, and I'm skipping down almost to text X42, about 3 lines above that. The transition from the stage of non-returner to arhatship is what we're focusing on here, and this can be a very subtle one. So as we move from non-returner to arhatship, then that's fairly subtle, and that has to do with that previous comment about as you move through these stages, it becomes more and more subtle as a part of that. So in particular, this move from non-returner to arhatship. Therefore, standards for distinguishing them are necessary. So in text X42, the Buddha proposes several criteria. So one of particular interest here, a trainee sees with wisdom the goal, nirvana, but cannot dwell in it. So you see what it is, you've got an understanding of what it is, but your practice just isn't quite up to being able to stay in that. It's like learning shamatha in the beginning. You know what you're supposed to be doing, but trying to get your mind to stay there steadily is a little bit more difficult. And so the arhat sees that with wisdom and can also dwell in the goal. So that is the significant difference, is being able to dwell in that state. And then there are a bunch of texts that follow that with different perspectives on the arhat. And the one I wanted to emphasize here is text X47, and skip down about 3 or 4 lines, where it turns to the 4 foundations of the arhat. And here is talked about as the sage at peace. And the Buddha used that term, peace, a great deal in describing nirvana and what it was like. And so that's one that I'd like to look at as we get to it. Now, the first and foremost, this is the next paragraph, the first and foremost of the arhats is the Buddha himself. And the Tathagata is the word that the Buddha used when referring to himself in the sutras. And his role, the archetypal role as discoverer and bringer of liberating truth. The word can be resolved in 2 ways. Taken as Tata Agata, separating it 2 words, adding another vowel in the middle, thus means thus come. It implies that the Buddha has come in accordance with an established pattern. And then taken as Tathagata, without the extra vowel in it, means thus gone. So with the vowel it's thus come, and without the vowel it's thus gone, which implies that he has gone in accordance with an established pattern. That he's gone to nirvana by the complete practice of serenity, insight, the paths, and the fruits. Next paragraph, later forms of Buddhism draw extreme distinctions between Buddhas and arhats. So the later forms that he's talking about here are Mahayana and Vajrayana. But the Nikayas, this distinction is not as sharp. So there's kind of subtle difference between the non-returner in particular and the arhat. On one hand, in the Nikayas, the Buddha is an arhat. On the other, arhats are a Buddha. And so, in the sense that they have attained full enlightenment, sambodhi, by awakening to the same truths that the Buddha himself realized. So the proper distinction then is that between a sama sambuddha, or perfectly enlightened one, and an arhat who has attained enlightenment and liberation as a disciple. So that's the distinction that seems to be being made here in the Nikayas, is that the Buddha, or specifically the Tathagata, is the one who originated it, and everybody else got there by the plan that he had put together. They're at the same level, but it's how they got there that is the difference. Okay? So then let's move on down to the next paragraph, to text X51. So this raises the question about the difference between a Tathagata, an arhat, the perfectly enlightened one, and a monk liberated by wisdom. Although it doesn't actually divide it into each of those as completely separate from each other. So this is applicable to any arhat disciple, and a few more lines down. The text expresses the difference in terms of the role and temporal priority. A Buddha has the function of discovering and expounding the path and he also possesses a unique familiarity with the intricacies of the path not shared by his disciples. So not only here is he the creator of the path, but he also really understands it at a deeper level than they do. His disciples follow the path. He reveals, and attain enlightenment afterward under his guidance. Continuing on 383 in the next paragraph, later Buddhism sometimes depicts the Buddha as motivated by great compassion. That's one of the things that in our tradition we talk about, that enlightenment is a combination of great compassion and wisdom, or the emptiness. Sometimes we just use emptiness as the expression there. And his arhat disciples in this case as kind of cool and aloof, if you will, indifferent to the plight of their fellow beings. But here text X52 states that not only the Buddha but arhats as well live their lives out of compassion for the world, teach the Dharma for the good, well-being, and happiness of their fellow beings, devas, as well as humans. So even in the Pali Canon, there is that recognition. I think when the two split more apart from each other, there was a tendency, and you can see it even in the expression of the term that was used, Hinayana, lower vehicle, and Mahayana, greater vehicle. And so they were trying to say, look, we're better than you, kind of a thing, as a part of that, which is very unfortunate, I would say, and one of the reasons that I prefer not to use those terms. And so I usually refer to it as the path of individual liberation and the path of altruism, which focuses more on the bigger differences, the bigger picture of those differences. But I still believe that the path of individual liberation does not mean that it's all about the individual. I do agree that it has a broader picture. It's just that that's not the main emphasis. Whereas in the path of altruism, that becomes the main emphasis as a part of it. Then we continue on. This goes on then to the next text, which is X53, but I'm going to skip the first paragraph on down to the second one there. These, however, are aspects of the path that Buddhas have fulfilled in common with arhat disciples. Beyond this, the Buddha possesses certain qualities that elevate them above even the foremost of the arhats. And then he lists two main ones. First, their being is essentially for others in a way that the most altruistic of the arhat disciples can only emulate but never equal. And second, their knowledges and spiritual powers are much greater than those of arhat disciples. Now that's the Mahayana views, what he's articulating here. So that's not what he's saying about the path of individual liberation per se. And in Tantra we'd even go further, but there it says everybody, all beings can become Buddhas. So then the next text goes through and makes some additional comparisons and so forth. And finally we get to text X58. This offers us a series of brief explanations why the Buddha is called the Tathagata. He is called Tathagata because he has fully awakened to the nature of the world, its origin, its cessation, and the way to its cessation. Because he has fully comprehended all phenomena within the world, whether seen, heard, sensed, or cognized, because his speech is invariably true, because he acts in conformity with his words, and because he wields supreme mastery within the world. So that is an overview of the texts that we are going to look at here, but we're going to take a short break first.